It's a beautiful day, and we're going to honor that by singing hymn number 87. 87. Oh, Lord.
Praise the Lord. Welcome to worship at the McPherson Church of the Brethren. We are an open and affirming congregation that strives to be hospitable and attentive to all of creation. We do not always meet that goal, and we have our share of ups and downs. But in the midst of it all, we continue to listen to God's call on our individual lives and the life of this congregation. We continue to seek to follow Jesus, peacefully, simply, together. We are humbled you have chosen to worship with us. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Ann Stover, and I'd like to welcome you to the Church of the Brethren this morning, whether you're watching online on YouTube or right here in the sanctuary. Let's take just a moment to greet each other this morning. This is our time for announcements and introductions of people who might be new. And Charlotte, I'll be with you in a moment. Catherine has an announcement right away.
Good morning, Catherine Whitaker. I wanted to say, I know a lot of us are traveling and in and out, but a lot of people are joining us electronically too. And I wanted to just acknowledge camp season. I wanted to give a giant thank you to Joanna in the office, to Jana, who's doing financials, who will still be doing financials because there's always cleanup. If your child, your grandchild, your niece, your nephew, whoever is missing stuff, come to the education building. We have stuff that smells like camp on the bench over there. I also wanted to say a huge thank you to the youth team, to Matt, to Daisy Friesen, to Dustin and Autumn Wilders, to Paul Olaminik, to Kaya Fife, who is our student rep on the team, to Pastor Jerry, who is all tanned and looking like he's been in the mountains a lot. And thank God for another year of all that traveling and safety, right? Safety for campers, safety for traveling. So can we just say hurrah and thank you? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Charlotte Lowen, and I want to introduce my cousin, Hobart Flory, and his wife, Terry, who are from Stanwood, Iowa. Many of you know them, and they are the last out-of-town remnants of the Flory reunion that we have had in the church basement the last several days. We had between 30 and 40 at various times, people coming and going, and appreciate the opportunity to use the church.
Especially nice in this heat. It's air conditioned.
Shane Kirshner, this time not about AV stuff. We've got that taken care of for right now. Thank you. I just want to put it out there that this coming Saturday, in addition to being the Emily Dell Memorial at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in the morning is the garden tour for the Master Gardeners. My house is on that, as is Ann and Gary Flory's house. So two of the 6 gardens are related to this congregation. So we invite you to join us. Saturday morning, it's like 9 to 1 or something like that. And there's posters around town. Talk to me later. I don't know.
I'm Philip Stover. I'm the chair of the Properties Committee, and I have for you a wonderful opportunity to be of service to our facility. I've got a list. The window wells need to be cleaned. The gutters need to be cleaned. When are you leaving? Oh, well, we'll get you signed up. The flower garden needs to be weeded, and we need the parking lot along the west cleaned. So what I'm looking for would be 10 ambitious, youthful, tenacious. I'm not quite sure what word fits in there, but I need 10 of you to sign up so that these little tasks can be cleaned up. So if you would seek me out, what we'll do is put you in contact with the other people that sign up, and you pick the time when you're going to do something. You know, like 2 o'clock when the breeze is cool and you can just sort of, work in the shade. No, actually show up at 6 a.m. and get it done before the sun rises. So anyway, 10 volunteers needed. Thank you.
Seeing no other announcements, let's settle our hearts and worship our God.
Please join me as we raise our voices together, speaking the words of Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from God, the maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot slip. God who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, God who watches over Israel will not slumber or sleep. God watches over you. God is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. God will keep you from all harm. God will watch over your life. God will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. Amen. Please rise and join in singing God of the earth, the sky, the sea. Be seated. And now it's time for Barbara to share a story for the children who all may be at camp. I see 3 kids on the floor back there. Are you guys?
How's everybody? We're getting here. Good. All right.
I have a hermit crab.
Oh my gosh.
I have a T-Rex.
It's like Eric Carle's book. You know that one? About the hermit crab? You got a T-Rex. Okay, let's put them down because I have a brand new book that I just bought and I'm really excited to share it with you, okay? It's called The Not So Friendly Friend. How can a friend be not so friendly and still be a friend? We're going to find out. There was once a girl who was new at her school. To make some good friends, she used the golden rule. Do you know what the golden rule is? Have you ever heard of it before? You're exactly right. She treated her classmates like she liked to be treated. She was helpful and loving, and her hugs were the sweetest. It was easy to like her. She was lovely and kind, a good problem solver who had a bright mind. She shared and she took turns, was as fair as they came. She used her words, not her body, to solve any problem. But try as she might, not everyone liked her. There was one other kid who found reason to fight her. At first, she tried harder to be this kid's friend, but this kid was not nice and teased her to no end. She's crying. Has that ever happened to you before? It did to me. Unkind words and rude actions would make her heart frown. When they played together, she was left feeling down. She realized this friend was no friend at all, because someone who loves you won't make you feel small. Staying true to herself and her beautiful heart, she created some boundaries, the right place to start. So look, she made a heart with flowers and then some sticks, maybe thorny sticks over here. Do you see how she drew the line? She's making those boundaries with her heart. If this kid was nice, she'd play and have fun. But if they were not, then she'd say, what do you think she's going to say? Any ideas? All done. If you want to be kind, I'd be glad to play. But if you don't treat me right, you can go on your own way. So she's making those boundaries. I'll play with true friends who make me feel good and treat me with love, just as a friend should. When you're ready to change and be nice again, you're welcome to join us and play with us then. She's kind of thinking about it, isn't she? See that in her face. The lessons she learned, she still uses today. She won't put up with bullies. It's never okay. She stands up for herself and how she wants to be treated and does so respectfully. She doesn't get heated. In other words, she doesn't act like a bully back to that person. And if she needs to help or doesn't know what to say, she'll ask a trusted adult to show her the way. Look like the teacher's trying to work some things out with her. With boundaries in place, healthy relationships can grow. You have fun and feel safe with your hearts all aglow. Okay, I read that story. I'm going to read you another story. I want you to compare these stories, okay? This is a story, and it comes from the Old Testament of the Bible, and it comes from 1 Samuel. And I bet it's a story that you're going to say, oh, I know this story. It's called David and Goliath.
I know that.
Yeah. The Philistines were enemies of God. Their army came to fight King Saul's army. A giant soldier named Goliath yelled, "Bring out your best soldier to fight me." Does he sound kind of like a bully? Yeah. "If your strongest soldier defeats me, we will be your slaves," he boomed. "If I defeat him, you will be our slaves." King Saul's soldiers were afraid. They did not want to fight the giant. Meanwhile, young David was taking food to his brothers. They were soldiers in King Saul's army. When David reached the camp, he saw Goliath, and he heard Goliath's challenge. "I'm not afraid to fight the giant," said David. King Saul called for David and said, "You cannot fight this giant. You are too young." And David replied, "God will be with me." King Saul gave his armor to David, but it was big and heavy, and David wasn't used to wearing armor. David went to a nearby stream and picked up 5 stones, and he stood before Goliath, and the giant laughed at him. But David didn't care. He said, "I come before you in the name of the Lord who rules over all." David put a stone in his sling, and he ran toward the giant, and he let the stone fly. It hit Goliath's forehead, and he fell to the ground. The Philistines saw that their hero was dead, and they ran away. Now, how are these two stories the same?
Because there's a bully and there's also a fighting girl.
You're right. So there is a bully in both stories, right? Okay. Now, how are they different? What's different about the two stories?
One used their body, one used their voice.
You're exactly right. One used the body, David did, didn't he? Yeah. And one used her voice. She used her words, okay? Now, in both of these stories, do you think that God was with all the people in the stories? Yeah, I think so. I think God was with the girl, and God was also with David. They handled it differently, didn't they? They handled the bully differently. But did it take courage to do that? Do you think David was courageous in what he did? Yeah. Do you think the girl was courageous in what she did? Sometimes it's hard to stand up to bullies, isn't it? Yeah. If I had to stand up to a bully, I think I'd probably like to use my words more than my body. Yeah? To me, that would make more sense to do that. But I would always have to remember that God is with us always, even when we have to stand up to bullies. And it can take a lot of courage to stand up to bullies. Have you ever had to stand up to a bully before? No? Okay. Sometime in your life you might. And I want you to remember that God is with you and that it does take courage to do the right thing. And hopefully that right thing for you is to use your words. Okay? So I have a bracelet for you today. Do you know what it says?
What?
It says courage. Okay? Would you like a bracelet that says courage to help you remember to have courage like David did and like courage like the little girl in our story did? Okay? What color do you want? They all say the same thing. You're going to go the orange clear down at the end. And green. Awesome job. Okay? All right. So this week, I want you to wear your courage and to remember that God is with us and God gives us that courage to do the right thing. Okay? I'll see you next week. Have a good week.
Thank you for your continued financial donations. You may give online at macbrethren.org. That's maccob at macbrethren.org. If you are worshiping with us in person, you may place your gift in the offering box at the back of the sanctuary. Just slip it through the slot in the top of the box. Or you may mail your gift to the church office at 200 North Carey Street, McPherson, Kansas 67460. Or hand deliver your check to the church office. Just push it through the mail slot at the Education Building. If you join our worship from afar, please donate to local needs in your area. Thank you for sharing.
My eyes to the
Thank you so much, Becky, Kara, and Lois. Thank you for the entire service today. Really appreciate it, you guys. As we dive into this story today, thank you, Barbara, by the way. As we dive into this story, I want to preface it a little bit. I do want to read the story. We have some slides to go with it. Chris and I have a daughter who is an American Sign Language interpreter. So when she is doing what's called VRS, which is Video Relay Service, a deaf consumer calls her, and she connects to a hearing consumer. And so she is the interpreter between. The person she's calling only hears her, but of course, the deaf consumer, they're online to one another, seeing one another, and speaking to one another. She never knows what call is going to come through. The company that she works for has agents all over the country. They are in country because it is American Sign Language, not any other kind of sign language. So you get calls from all over the country. You can't tell them who you are. You can't tell where you can't say, my name is. You can't say, here's where I live. So accents, right? And different cultures and different people and different ways of being. And so a lot of what she does when she's getting continuing ed is she gets what's called ELK, and that is extra learning knowledge, because that helps her be present with people when they call. So she has taken extra learning knowledge on Ebonics. She has taken extra learning knowledge on transmissions in cars and how they work, because she's had people call in their mechanics. She's an expert on Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, banking, medical. She has done a lot of medical stuff. And every continuing education class that she takes helps her understand the consumer that she will need to interpret for. So at our house, whenever we are a little out on the edge and we think we know what we're talking about, but we really don't, we give each other a nudge and say, you need a little more elk there with that topic. So today with pictures, we're gonna add a little more elk to the story of David and Goliath. And thank you, tech people, as always, for helping put pictures up on the screen. So we're just gonna flip through these. Eric has a script, I have a script, and we're good to go. Now, the Philistines gathered their forces for war, and they assembled at Sokah in Judah. They pitched a camp at Ephes Dammim, between Sokah and Azekah. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span, 9 feet, 6 inches. He had a bronze helmet on his head. He wore a scale of armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels, a little over 181 pounds. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod. Its iron-pointed point weighed 600 shekels. The point was 15 pounds. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man, have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." And then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons. And in Saul's time, he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul into war. The first was Eliab, the second, Abinadab, the third, Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest boys followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. And now Jesse said to his son David, "Hey, take this ephah of roasted grain." An ephah is equivalent to a bushel, equal to 8 dry gallons. A dry gallon is 8 pounds, so an ephah is 1,024 ounces or 64 pounds of grain. Take this grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers. Hurry to the camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are doing and bring some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. So early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up, set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle position, shouting their war cry. Israel and the Philistines, drawing up their lines, facing each other, David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his line, shouted his usual defiance. David heard it, and whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now, the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from all taxes in Israel." David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the very armies of the living God?" And so they repeated to him what had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." And when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, Eliab burned with anger and said, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those sheep? I know how conceited you are. I know how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." And David said, "I get this because I'm the youngest. Now what have I done? Can I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else, brought up the same matter. The men answered him as before. What David said was overheard, and it was reported to Saul. And King Saul sent for David, and David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." And Saul said, "You're not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him. You're just a young man, and he's been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and carried off sheep from the flock, I just went after it, struck it, rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, killed it. Your servant has killed the lion and the bear. So this uncircumcised Philistine will just be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. God, who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and God be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him. He put a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on a sword over the tunic, and then he tried to walk around because he was not used to it. And he said to Saul, "I cannot go out in these. I'm not used to them." And so he just took them all off. Then he took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in hand, he approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was just little more than a boy, glowing with health, handsome, and he despised him. And he said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with your sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods and said, "Come here, I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, But I come against you in the name of God Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day, God will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And this very day, I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And all those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that God saves. This battle is God's, and God will give all of you into our hands.
Good morning. Well, as most or all of you may know, I've been gone for a few Sundays, traveling back and forth to camp, and I come home and I preach, and the reward is I get to preach on this story. So, I'll start by, quick, a show of hands. How many of you read on a regular basis the story of David and Goliath? Like you just can't wait to dive into this text. Raise your hands. Yeah, I expected crickets. Another poll. Show of hands. How many of us actually enjoy hearing or rehearsing this story, this epic tale? Not as many hands go up, but not many hands go up, but there are a few, and so I appreciate that. Those same people, do you enjoy the image that David says of cutting off your head and feeding you to the birds and the wild animals? No, I didn't think there'd be a lot of hands on that one. But as I was sitting with this text this past week, I realized as a good brother and pastor, I have to find a way, a delicate dance, if you will, to take a text and honor the text, but also honor our heritage as a historic peace church, a text that's anchored in war and violence and violent imagery. How in the world am I going to do this? You know, there is a reason that in my 20-plus years of preaching, I have intentionally skipped over this text during the lectionary. But Pastor Catherine, in her wisdom, messaged me over a month ago and said, we're going to do a series on Samuel, and these are the days that you're preaching. And to follow in her leadership and her steps, I sat with this text, wondering how in the world are we going to do this? How can we honor God, self, and other, and our heritage and our ancestors? So sit back. We'll see how it goes. Might be a conversation we have in the parking lot. But that's what worship should do. We should carry over in our conversation. But before I go any further, before I delve deeper into the text and what I feel is something we can truly handle together, I think it's important that we name that is this story and stories akin to this story that people nations, people of faith, have used as a way to endorse and enable genocide of others who inhabit the land. Specifically in our own country's history, it is through these conquering images of God that First Nation people were truly victims of genocide. Through the context of manifest destiny or the doctrine of discovery, people of faith eliminated other people because it was God's chosen. So we must truly also hear this with the history of violence in our own country in the back of our minds. And as you know, I am a champion of social justice. I love working for social justice. If you spend a week with me at church camp, we're going to get there eventually, and we're going to talk about it. But I got to tell you, even I was tired of my own voice when I sat with this week. I'm like, I don't want to hear another Jerry message. So if I'm tired of it, I can only imagine where you've become. But again, we need to be aware that whenever there's language or images of God as conqueror, that it leads to violence, and we need to be open to maybe understanding the text in a different way. So here's what we're going to do this morning. Knowing that our foundation as a historic peace church is where we come from, we're going to hold two David and Goliath stories hand in hand. The one is the epic tale that we all know so well and children are told. And Barb, wow, thank you for, great job and way to hold those two stories. And we had not contacted each other, but the fact that we're both approaching this from two narratives illustrates how God's Spirit is moving. So we have the story of David and Goliath, well known in so many circles. In this one, I want to introduce you to a guy named Bryan Stevenson, founder of Equal Rights Initiative, who has faced a few Goliaths in his journey. If you're not aware of who he is, a little background. He wrote the powerful memoir, Just Mercy, a story of justice and redemption. He grew up in Milton, Delaware, and his mom worked for Dover Air Force Base. What did she do? She was an equal opportunity officer. So is it possible that from the very beginning of his development, he got this message of inclusion, of working for justice, of creating a world where those on the margins have an opportunity to know themselves and their community, and yes, God. What I was alarmed by, growing up in Delaware, you would think Stevenson would know progressive ideology and inclusion and acceptance. I mean, he's not that much older than I am. But are you aware that when he was young, up until second grade, he was in a segregated school? That most of his childhood, when he went to the doctor or the dentist or even to get a vaccine, they would bring him and all the other students of color in through the back door so that their white peers would be served first. And the doctors and the dentists wouldn't have to be seen associated with them. Friends, this wasn't in Alabama. This was in the cosmopolitan world known as the Northeast of the United States, the area that was supposed to be with it, an area rooted in justice and equality. Yet even in the progressive Northeast, Stevenson knew society viewed him as other, simply due to the color of his skin. But he would not back down. He would not be deterred. Like David with very little armor, Bryan Stevenson kept pushing forward, knocking down doors that were meant to stop his ascension in society. And each door he knocked down became another smooth stone launched at systemic racism and injustice. David had a tangible, practical, pragmatic, fleshly target to confront. And regardless how we want to interpret or sit with the story, we know the ending. So now we must look at David. We have Bryan here, we have David here. David, with one stone, takes down a giant. And we have this heroic tale of a young adult who feared little and trusted God completely. We can unpack David and Goliath through our Brethren Peace Church all day. And we may never come to a place where we're comfortable with the images and the words that are used. And I applaud us for that. Our ancestors knew better than to just accept a story from any section of the Bible and assume it must become law. They sat with these difficult stories, pericopes, and they asked challenging questions of God, of self, of faith, of community, and how their lives could possibly align with what God was calling them to be. So here we have the story of the youngest son of Jesse, the one relegated to care for the sheep because he was too young for anything else, the one that Samuel had anointed as the next king of Israel. Raise your hand if you're the oldest sibling in your family, or even the middle child. I got to ask you a question. If the baby of the family was anointed to be your leader someday, would you just be like patting them on the back saying, yeah, that's great? Let's throw in a little more. Let's say David's a little overzealous, a little arrogant. Maybe his ego's grown. Can you imagine how it must have been to grow up with him? Oh, the future king of Israel, great. Go back and care for the sheep. Right? I can imagine the conversation the siblings would have, and the older brothers have grown tired of hearing David being the chosen, the anointed, the one to save Israel. Because in that day and age, the youngest wasn't to be served. The youngest was called to serve the oldest. It was expected that the oldest would amass all of the family's wealth and the property and the sheep and the herd, and the youngest would become one who would work for them. So there's a lot of layers to this story. And so when Jesse sends David, the youngest, the pretty one, the one who just has a shepherd's cloak, out, he does it to do what David is supposed to do: serve the older brothers. Jesse understands David's role. David is there to care for them. David is there to meet their needs. Jesse wanted the youngest to serve the older. Even if we know that David is anointed, Jesse still gets it. He still wants the roles to be the way they're supposed to be. So here's David running up to his older brothers, probably eager to see them, happy to see them, as every baby is to see their older siblings. Am I right? I'm the baby. I couldn't wait to see my oldest brother. The two middle ones, we tend to be a little closer in age, and they're in a little more scuffles. But the oldest, Tony and I, were very close. And maybe he brought news from home, but his brothers weren't nearly as happy to see him. As I read the text, I understand the text, they're a little annoyed by the little one showing up all glowy and happy and bringing food and talking about dad. I imagine they sighed and said, could you please just go away? You're a nuisance. And David, as Catherine shared, what, I don't even get to talk? You've said enough, I'm sure, is what they said. But David ignored them. And we know what happens next. So back to Brian. Brian, who's also, by the way, one of the youngest. He's faced everything that David's had to face and more when it comes to Goliaths. And Brian Stevenson, just like David, remained persistent, refusing to back down, refusing to accept the fate and the role and the image that society gave him. And by the way, just like David, through every hurdle that he overcome, through every door he knocked down, Brian Stevenson was anchored in a robust faith, an amazing faith. Stevenson excelled in the classroom, earning his undergrad degree from Eastern University in St. David's, Pennsylvania. And while he was a student there, he led the gospel choir. He's a jazz pianist. He could rock the keys with his fingers. David may sling a stone with his hands, but David can't create music like Brian Stevenson can. From Eastern, he made his way to Harvard University Law and excelled, earning a master's in arts from public policy from the John F. Kennedy School of Government and his Juris Doctorate degree in law. Truly, Stevenson has plenty of stones in his bag. When he needs to lean on them, he can. And it was while he was in law school that he spent time working at the Southern Center for Human Rights and found his calling. He would spend his days, once he was a lawyer, combating the systemic injustice that is evident and apparent in the criminal justice system. David stood before a Goliath with a little armor, a slingshot, and a bag of smooth stones that he gathered from a nearby stream. Stevenson stood before a giant of a justice system that mocked him and anyone who dared to challenge or change it. I want to share a little bit about David again. See, I told you these two stories are more alike than you realize. Are you aware that in ancient civilization, what Goliath is doing is normal? He's, according to the commentary, I'm quoting it, Goliath was talking trash. He was boasting. He was trying to intimidate through words. And it worked for most of Israel. They ran away. This 9-foot giant talking trash, intimidating. Even the king of Israel didn't want to stand before him. And so when David goes to the front of the line, he's also doing what is normal. He's talking trash back, and it escalates. Apparently the shofar didn't scare them away, but David standing to the front of the line, it escalates as it would. Words weren't working because they weren't listening to each other. They were intimidating and trying to scare one another. But, maybe ancient civilizations had it right. They used their words a lot and avoided bloodshed as much as they could. Perhaps we are truly the archaic ones. We glorify the violence and the death tolls and collateral damage. We seek bloodshed in our military endeavors. They try to avoid it. So as Saul faces the reality of losing everything, he sends this young man to the front of the line. I'm sure he did one of these, yeah, God be with you. Get ready for the funeral, right? But let's not just cast David away. David's no joke. He's brilliant. He has a history of success. He's cunning. He knows he's equipped for the task at hand. And oh, by the way, he has this God at his right hand. God is taking David into this. So armed with only a shepherd's rope, a sling, and 5 stones from a river, David refuses to turn and run. No, instead he changes direction and goes right at the giant. He gets in a verbal sparring contest with the giant, uses the giant's words against him. And then he slings the 1 stone, and we know the rest. The tale becomes a foundation of every epic narrative of someone facing giants and overcoming them. Which brings us back to Bryan Stevenson. After law school, Stevenson accepted a position for the Southern Center for Human Rights. He learned quickly, and he shares this in his memoir, that with a history of lynching and the murder of African men and women, that has become a foundation for the disproportionate amount of African American men specifically who are on death row. It's a continuation of the lynching cycle. Stevenson serving there until the doors closed and was left with another giant, another Goliath to overcome. How does he continue the work he was called to do? He creates a nonprofit and continues laboring, continues working. He was equipped for the calling as an incredible orator. He excelled in the classroom and the courtroom. He could spin words in cases like no other. David had stones to steal life. Stevenson, like the little girl in the story, had smooth stones of words to protect life. One used his weapons to murder an enemy. The other, Stevenson, used his gifts to offer hope and justice and mercy to so many the justice system deems too far gone for anything good. And they have done good. In the years that the Equal Rights Initiative has existed in Alabama, of all places, over 140 persons in that part of our country, and if you know your history, you know that doesn't exactly speak to what is the norm. Over 140 persons have been helped. And I'm not talking about the visiting in prison kind of help. Wrongful convictions overturned, sentences lessened. They've gotten unjust sentences thrown out. They've rescued people from death row. David only had one Goliath to overcome. Stevenson and his team continue to face innumerable, even more powerful Goliaths, and they refuse to quit. They refuse to back down. The lives that have literally been saved by their work testify to God's ability to move mountains. Stevenson's faith has evolved as anyone's should, but I bet he still finds joy in tickling the keys on the church piano, maybe playing a little jazz to all that will listen. Because this is true, sisters and brothers, friends. Faith without works is irresponsible. Faith without works is irresponsible. But works without faith just isn't the same. Stevenson, like David, used his faith to guide his mission, which brings us to here and now into our story. We, not just our congregation, friends, but the entire Church of the Brethren denomination in the United States, we are facing another Goliath. Dwindling numbers, splits over topics, churches leaving due to irreconcilable differences, lower attendance, which means income that isn't where it needs to be. Bills grow, inflation grows, income lowers. We have our own Goliaths, friends. But like David, like Stevenson, we must stand in faith, trusting the God who guided our ancestors over the last 300 years, which they had their own treacherous times as well. That this same God will recreate in us a new way of being. And yes, it's scary. Staring at giants, the ones standing before us, we might even shake in our boots a little bit. But we must grab into our own bag, and more like Stevenson than David, and choose the smooth stones of love, of mercy, of healing, of compassion, and of ministry. And we must launch these stones into the void, trusting that God will use them to the good of all. Amen. Please rise for our sending song. Please be seated for the sending words and remain seated for the sending music. One of the things I took out of the original message was my pop culture obsession with Lord of the Rings. Sorry, I just figure you guys are tired of hearing about it. But how many of you hear the image, read the words of David getting all the sort of military garb on, and do you have the image of Sam and Frodo outside of Mordor? Like they can't really see because of all the shield and the helmet and the garb, and they're like just kind of these little things. I laugh when I hear those words because I have that image in my head every time, and I almost hopefully made you laugh with that. But there's a reality in the story of Lord of the Rings and David's story and Stevenson's story. Some of the biggest Goliaths we're going to have to face come from within those closest to us, those who don't believe that it can be done. But friends, I tell you, if at 50, and yeah, I hit that mark about a month ago, if at 50 I can still learn how to use my words in ways that lift up and include and welcome, a small little Lyons, Kansas kid, anybody can do it. We can move this mountain, and we can do it with God going before us and with us. We can create a world that is just and peaceful and loving and merciful. And we can defy statistics that say churches are going to close. I say no to that. I say we're going to grow in amazing ways, maybe not on Sunday mornings. I can't testify to what God has in store for us. But I believe we can still grow in amazing ways and defy the statistics. But we have to reach into our bag and be willing to share the stones that God gives us to the glory of God and for our neighbor's good. Amen.